Uh, I want to start by thanking Esther Meisels. So Esther sponsored today's class graciously. And whenever someone sponsors a class like this, my first thought is this person has a thirst for learning. And Esther said that the Marshall's class is sponsored by Esther with thanks for his love of sharing knowledge with us in an engaging and fun way. I like to think of that, Esther, that it's engaging and fun, because learning can also be engaging and should be, I don't know if the word, I use the word entertaining often, but it doesn't have to be entertaining, but it certainly helps if the person that's teaching loves sharing the knowledge. And you've shared a lot of knowledge yourself, Esther. And one of the things that I've learned about you in the past many years in your involvement at our shul, as well as from what I've heard from the involvement that you had in Nariver as well, is that your thirst for knowledge has taken you from a place where you understood a language and you knew Hebrew. That wasn't the issue, but you took it a step further and developed not only a learned style by myself, who started beginning sharing with you Nusach, Hatfilah, but you actually have now developed your own style. You've come into your own. You follow a course of Nusach, but you developed your own style. And I think that's wonderful. And I know that you attend many classes and many lectures and many programs in shul, and you participate and you lead services and you can read Torah. The list goes on, it's endless. But I really want to thank you for that sponsorship for today. It's very meaningful to me, and I'm sure it is to everyone. So I see people applauding. When we spoke about time zones last week, we were saying if there's no halachic ruling that says, there's no law that says you can't send a fax if you haven't accepted Shabbat, or an email to someone who has accepted it, we're not telling him to open it up. But what made me think was the comment, which I hadn't thought about myself, and that was, it's not nice. It doesn't say in the Torah anywhere or in the Gemara, it's not nice. Those words don't come into place, those three words, that's not nice. But yet there is something to that. Continuously through my learning, which I'm trying to share with you, and one of the comments that Bernie Shimmer made to me was last week he said that when I teach something, I have to prepare. When I prepare, it reinforces what I've learned myself. So in a sense, you're helping me retain what I've learned by trying to share my notes with you. And then you're learning a little bit on the way as well, and I hope. But what I found interesting was that's not nice. And Judaism is filled with that. What does that actually mean? Well, let's say you phoned someone on Shabbos. I never thought of this last week. You phoned them in Israel and it's Shabbat there. Your intention is not for them to pick up the phone. You know they're Shomer Shabbos. You know that they don't pick up a phone on Shabbat. And you're phoning them because you know they have an answering machine. You want to leave a message on the answering machine, which maybe they'll even be able to hear because maybe they have the call. When you can hear, you monitor a call and you hear it's the duct cleaning guy, you don't have to pick it up on Shabbos. But it's always Alex from the duct cleaning company. I get called every week by Alex. So what happens is you phone someone because you want to share the news that somebody just gave birth to a beautiful baby. I think that that's worthwhile. It's worth a phone call. You just want to leave a message. But they're concerned because they don't have call display. Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe they don't have a call monitoring. Maybe they're thinking nobody phones me on Shabbat because nobody would dare call me on Shabbat because they all know that I'm from and I have a beard to the floor and a big hat bigger than anyone else. Nobody would call me unless it was an absolute emergency. They must be calling me to tell me that I have to run next door to my neighbor's house and give him nitroglycerin because he's having a heart attack to settle him down right away before the ambulance gets there. That's why you're calling me. I better pick up the phone. You've caused me to pick up the phone because you're not in violation of a Torah mitzvah. Why are you not in violation? Because we learned over and over again that wasn't your intent. Your intent was to call to tell me somebody had a baby and leave a message. Your intention was not for me to pick up a phone. You don't even care if I pick up the phone. In fact, you wished I didn't pick up the phone because you just want to leave a message because you're thinking I probably have in modern world a call answer. But yet you inadvertently made me pick up the phone because I'm thinking the guy next door needs a nitroglycerin, you're calling to tell me. But really, you were only calling to tell me something happy. Like your son Joshua ate his first candy apple and had a good experience at the exhibition. So you want to share that. You're going to leave a message. It's not like such a Gleisa Gedilla. Well, you didn't even cause a rabbinic violation by phoning. The person that picked up the phone, even though their intent might have been something different for picking it up, they committed a violation. Whether it was a Torah violation, whether it was a rabbinic violation, who cares at this point? We're not giving him lashes. We're not going to put him out in the street and punish him publicly. But we have to think about those three words sometimes within Jewish law. And I hadn't thought about that. That's not nice. So we have to think, if we're doing something where somebody has already accepted Shabbos, maybe we should refrain from doing that because we don't want to unintentionally cause a reaction. Just today in my morning shiur that I had in one of my classes on in the subject of medical ethics, I was learning about the idea once again of intentional and non-intentional. And several weeks from now, many weeks from now, we will share that story together. It's a fascinating story, and we'll have it. But within the halachat, within the hilchot of technology, there exists the subject of artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization. And everything that we do when it comes to halakha and Jewish law has to have sources. They have to have sources to the Gemara, to the Talmud. And then from those sources, we link it up to something, even if it's far stretched in the Torah. We've learned that over and over again. And what these rabbis do, and I don't mean just the rabbis of the modern poskim, the modern rabbis, the greats, or even the earlier rabbanim, what they do is they do the thinking in a sense for us to give us the halakha and the law. But I like to know where they came from. I like to search and go, why do we do this? Where did it come from? Where did we get it from? So in terms of how we get there, and some of what you hear, you'll think that's not nice. you're gonna say that's not nice. But always remember, when I give you information, you'll find out that at the very end of everything, there is something that is more relevant and more nice than what you originally thought was not nice. Much of what we will learn through the courses will leave you maybe even shocked at the end of the class, where you say, how could they decide that? That's terrible. It's awful. It's inhumane. And then you'll find out in the next class, oh, they really didn't mean that. They did a 180 and turned it around and said, that's maybe what we believe the Torah is telling us we should do, but that's not necessarily how we're going to flip the law to turn it around so it's a palatable law for us. One of the things that I learned recently, before we talk about this subject, is something really fascinating that I hadn't thought of, and we'll be sharing it again. And that is an idea of how society has changed. And I'm talking from early on, from the 13th century, let's say, from the time of Rambam, 12th, 13th century, to the time of the pogroms in Poland to today. The difference is, you know, the expression, what's the short version of the Seder? You want to make a Seder and I give you 3 minutes. We know it's Pesach, Matzah, Maror, right? 3 things you have to have. Pesach, the Pesach, the Paschal lamb, which we don't have anymore, but we use matzah, matzah, Pesach, matzah, and maror, and the bitter herbs to understand. And I never understood the bitter herbs part because I like bitter herbs. And I go, how is it bitter when I eat it with my gefilte fish and I think it tastes good? But it's supposed to make us think and make us tell a story. So one of the things that I learned was this idea of how, here's the short Seder. The Jews were in trouble. The Jews are in trouble. The Jews always will be in trouble. Bring on the knedlach. Right? Nirtza, the meal. Get to the meal, because the rest of it, we already told the story. They were in trouble. So the Jews were always in trouble, whether it was the expulsion of Spain, whatever it was. And what we find wherever we go in history in Europe, that there were pogroms, there was the Holocaust, with the Nazis killing us, burning us alive, burying us alive, destroying us. So we know Halachah tells us, if you want to save a life, you always have to save a life first. You know, there were some great rabbis that refused during the Holocaust when the Nazis, what they did was they would save up food, they'd give them nothing to eat. Nothing. Then all of a sudden they'd bring out the spoils. When I mean the spoils, I don't mean rotten food. They'd bring out, here, look, there's a beautiful cake. Here's some beautiful, whatever it is, meat. Here's some beautiful bread. Look at this brot. And they bring out all these beautiful things. And when did they bring it out? Yom Kippur. They would, on purpose, I'm not joking, and the Nazis would do this because they knew on the calendar, and they'd say, we're bringing it on Yom Kippur, to say, go ahead, eat. And the rabbis, a lot of these greats, they were saintly. They said, I'm not eating it, it's Yom Kippur. If I couldn't eat it yesterday, I'm not eating it today. They were wrong. They should have eaten it. Because if eating saves your life, it doesn't matter what the situation is. It doesn't matter if it's kosher, if it's not kosher, if it's pork. There's no difference at that point of whether eating meat and milk together or eating pork. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Eat it. You have to save a life. Pekuach nefesh. But yet, times became different. Earlier on, the Jews might have been not loved, but we didn't have the pogroms. And when the pogroms started and they started rounding people up and saying, you know what, let's rape the women, let's kill the children, let's burn their shtetls. Halachah had to change and adapt. Why would halachah have to change and adapt to those kinds of times? I'll give you an example, and we're going to learn this again later on again. Originally, who was our greatest thinker that we follow when it comes to halakha? Rambam. We always start with Maimonides. Why? Rambam was a great interpreter of the Jewish law, and Rambam wrote the series of books. It was called Biyad Chazakah, but it was also called the Mishnah Torah. And I've taught you already before that the Mishnah Torah was a set of books that he said at that time, you don't need the Talmud and the Gemara. It's full of bad things and arguments. Forget about it. Just read the Mishnah Torah. It's the concise, it's the Cole's Note version of what you need to do. Do that and you'll be way ahead of the game. Just follow the rules. Halavai. Jews don't always follow the rules. So what happened was people said, no, I want to learn. I want to know. I'm going to read. Anyway, some of the laws were made originally. Rambam felt that a Jewish person has no obligation to save a non-Jew on Shabbat. That's shocking. Think about it. Somebody's lying on the street. They're not Jewish. They're dying. They got hit by a car. They got hit by a horse and a wagon and a buggy, and they got run over and they're lying there. You don't have to help them because we as a people, we only help Torah observant people because on Shabbat, we're Torah observant and we can't become a Mechalel Shabbos. We can't violate Shabbat to save you. You're not Jewish. I'd let somebody else save you. Another non-Jewish person will come and save you. I don't have to worry about you. Now, why was that accepted originally? Because I'm horrified by that thought. It was accepted because in those times, Jews stayed with Jews. They all lived in Bathurst Manor or the Shtetl or wherever it was. They didn't live like some over here and some over there, and I'm going to live next door to Indian people, and I'm going to live next door to people from Jamaica, and I'm going to live next door to people who are from Hungarian that aren't Jew. We didn't have that. Even the Jews that were from different areas stayed together. The Hungarian Jews stayed together, and the Polish Jews stayed together. Everybody stayed themselves. So it was not thought by the non-Jews to be a bad thing. They thought they stay to themselves, we stay to ourselves. Why should they help us? We already know the Jews aren't going to help us because the Jews, they can't violate Shabbat. They've said it over and over again. It happened on a Saturday. They can't help me. So it was accepted. Why was it accepted? Because the idea was by the Jews that designed these laws, there's no hatred from that. There's not going to be any discord between them and us because we don't even associate together. If there's no discord, why should we worry about it? So later on, when we had discord and there were pogroms and that we had to live with them together in a society all mingled together, it was not surprising, but in a way it's surprising. Is you take any city in the world, take Amsterdam, for instance, that during the Holocaust, all of a sudden these people that were Dutch said, they were like my best friend. They were my neighbor next door. We used to share everything together. The kids swam together. The kids went to fishing together. We played together. All of a sudden they didn't want to know us. We're Jews. Nothing to do with us. A few saved. There's 2 volumes of books in the Museum of Amsterdam for the righteous Gentiles that saved Jews. But generally speaking, they kept to themselves. And when they all associated together, they learned that we have to get along in a society together. So the rabbis started to come up with laws that said, if a non-Jew's life is being threatened on the street, whatever the reason is, you must help them and save their life and step forward and do it. But what I found interesting was, now here I'm going to put in those words, that's not nice. What was their reasoning for changing the law? The reasoning for flipping the law around, or how about this? Reinterpreting the law. A better interpretation was to say, we don't want discord. If I walk by him on the street, they're going to hate us even more. And then they're going to even more pogroms and even more tsuras and trouble to the Jews. Better we don't cause trouble. Let's help them. If we help them, there'll be less hatred. That was the reason for changing the halachah, which I think is the wrong reason for changing a halachah. The right reason should be we want to change the halachah because we want to be better people. Isn't that what we always talk about in our shul? We always say, we have to make sure that we're recognizing the indigenous people because we at Beth David want to be better than everybody else. We want to show as an example to the city of Toronto that this is how a Jew should behave, by being leaders in the community when it comes to being good. Not, well, if we don't recognize the indigenous people, people are going to look at us and think it's not nice. That's not a reason to do it. The Pope the other day apologized to, I'm going off topic here, but I'll just say he apologized for what happened in the schools, the residential schools. And they presented him with this beautiful snowshoe. If anybody saw it on the news, it was a snowshoe that if you really looked carefully for the few seconds that they showed it, if you know anything about this kind of art, this looked like it was made from gut, and it was the most beautiful woven piece of art that I've ever seen. I would love to have it for myself to hang on the wall. It was just gorgeous. And the Pope took it and he went here, and they're going to take it and put it in the basement with all the stolen artwork that they have from the Holocaust. But they're going to hide it there in the tunnels. But the point is that Ruth is shocked that I said that, but it's true. And they're going to take all that, and I don't even think he appreciated it. But what do I know? It didn't look like it. I would have looked at it if I was the Pope, and I would have said, wow, this is magnificent. What a beautiful. No, he took it and he went like this. Here, it's like a remote control. There, put it over there. Harvey, stick it over there with the other stuff that we stole. Anyway, so the Pope took this and he said, and what did he say? I don't know what the apologies were because I don't know if it was in the news exactly what he said, but I know 2 words had to have been said. I'm sorry. Anybody can say I'm sorry, right? We have to act differently. It's not good enough to say I'm sorry. So here we come to a new topic within the idea of technology, because it's a technology thing, artificial insemination, in vitro. And from this, we will then move towards the ethics of medicine and treating people. And the topics in medical ethics will be topics like, some of you might not want to come because you might not want to hear what it is. Some of you will be fascinated and want to hear topics like assisted suicide. What do our rabbis teach us? Not that what does Marshall Loomer teach you. We don't care what Marshall Loomer says. We care what the rabbis say. What about transgender surgery? What do the rabbis say about that? Which rabbis are in favor, meaning there is a time and a need for it? Which rabbis say they're not in favor of it, and why? And what is the bottom line, and why do we follow it? And topics like that. But when it comes to artificial insemination, anybody ever watched I'm ashamed to even ask this question, because don't even put your hand up to the answer to this. If you've ever flipped through the channels and you pause for a minute on the Jerry Springer show, the old Jerry Springer show was they always said, who is the real father? It was always, that was the big question. And they make you wait a whole show to find out who the father was, because two Mishagoyim, So anyway, really what we're talking about today a little bit, to beginning, is the original sources for how do we establish who the halachic father is? Now, I didn't say who is the father. I said, who is the halachic father? Who is the halachic father? So we go to the Torah and we know there's a mitzvah, the mitzvah of kibud av va'em. You thought I was going to say the mitzvah of pru'ervu, the mitzvah to have children, to be fruitful and to multiply, but I didn't start with that. I started with the mitzvah of kibud av va'em, honoring your father and your mother. Well, how do you honor a father if he is not naturally or really your father? So what determines if he's really your father? What is the halachic status? So there's prohibitions in the Torah, like which relationships constitute incest. That's a big topic with artificial or in vitro, because what happens is somebody donates a sperm in the hospital in Guelph, Ontario. And then somebody else from the same bloodline marries into the family of whoever was that donated the sperm. Does that count as incest? And then what hospitals can control that? And are there Torah observant hospitals that can be designed to help out with those decisions? Or do we just don't care? I'm always interested now, I'm sure that Aaron Shimmer would have a lot to say about this. Why is it that I know myself personally, and probably many of you, so many Jewish people that have died of pancreatic cancer? Why is it that I know so many Jews that have died of glioblastoma? Now, we know about the BRCA gene. We know a little bit about genetics. We're just touching the surface for genetics. We're not there yet. We know a lot, but there's plenty that we don't know yet. And things will be different down the road. But if somebody donates semen and then someone becomes pregnant and has a baby, and then someone from the same, could be he donated to two different women. And now two women have received sperm from the same man. One's in Guelph, Ontario. One's in Hamilton, Ontario. And they both happen to be from Jewish families. And a boy is born and a girl is born, a boy in Guelph and a girl in Hamilton. And they go to a USY convention and they meet and they fall in love and they get married. Are they, in fact, brother and sister? You know, it's a very interesting question. So it's become very complicated these days. And in vitro, where the woman's egg is fertilized with a male sperm in a laboratory, because it's all done in a lab, and then the embryo reaches to a certain size, and then it's implanted, it's taken and it's put into the womb of the woman. So what is that called? I mean, we think of it as in vitro, right? There was no act of intercourse. There was no sex involved in any of this. And it's conception without the act of intercourse. Where in history do we know that from? We know the story of Jesus, right? We always heard about what is it? How do they refer to it? The immaculate conception, right? All right. So we know that, mind you, I always wondered about that. How is that really so possible when they said that James, I don't know if you know, I read a whole thesis on this because of Bernie Schemmer. I always think it's Bernie's fault. Bernie gave me a book to read, and it took me 2 years to read it because it sat on the shelf. But one day I promised I'm going to read it. It's about how Jesus became Christian by a professor. I think he was at York University. And, you know, he had a brother, James. So James wasn't born without conception. So it's interesting when you start to see in history, was Mary fooling around with the next door neighbor and got pregnant and said, I happen to, you know. So there's early sources in the Gemara. According to the Gemara, they asked a man named Ben Zoma. We've heard of Ben Zoma before. And they asked him the following question. They said, a woman who never engaged in intercourse and is therefore a virgin, she's never engaged in intercourse, she's a betula, she became pregnant. Is that woman allowed to marry a Kohen Gadol? What is her halachic status? Well, first of all, how can that happen? How can a woman who never engaged in intercourse, and this is in the Gemara, in the Talmud, and is a virgin, become pregnant? Is that woman allowed to marry a Kohen? So my first question is, they're saying, what is the halachic status? I'm thinking, wait a minute, how did she get pregnant if she didn't have intercourse? How does that happen? So we have to be concerned. We have to be concerned, they said in the Gemara, that are you ready? Leonard, you ready for this one? She became pregnant in the bathtub. That's what it says. So Rashi says, a bathtub, he's explaining what it means. Like, let's say, how'd you get pregnant in a bathtub? A bathtub is this thing, he says, where you wash your body, and you have to say that some man might have been, don't forget, in the old days, hot water was hard to come by. You had to build a fire, you had to throw sticks in the fire, you had to heat up the water, remember the old days, they would show in the thing, you threw the brother into the water, then you took the brother out and you washed him, then you threw the little girl into the water and you washed her, and after the kids were clean, if there wasn't too big a ring around the tub, you got in yourself and you bathed. You didn't boil water every single time for a different bath. You shared it, and we knew nothing about infection in those days. There was no such thing. Somebody got sick, it was God's will. We didn't know about antibiotics, we didn't know about infection. So what they're saying in the Gemara is that some man, it was a public bathtub, call it. A public bath. Oh, see, now Ruth's getting it, right? You had to get it. It's a public bath. Some man, you have to forgive my language because I have to say it the way it is, okay? Some man ejaculated in the bathtub. And subsequently, this woman, she bathed in the same water, and somehow the semen found its way into her womb and became fertilized. So the Even HaEzer says, regarding this Gemara, he said, first of all, there's a big doubt. There's a doubt that regarding the status which produced from the bathtub pregnancy. He says, I don't believe it. He says, a woman who became pregnant without intercourse. He says, I doubt it even happened. He said, the man who was there earlier, here's the bigger question. Did he fulfill the mitzvah of pru or vu? Remember I said, Len, we're going to get there. Because I said the first mitzvah is kibud av va'im. The mitzvah of honoring a father and mother. This child has to honor a father and mother. Well, we got to find out who that is. It's the Jerry Springer show. But before we do that, now we're at a place where we're going, wait a minute. This man who just happened to ejaculate in the bathtub and then got out and dried himself off and went home. And then this woman who went in the bathtub innocently to have a bath became pregnant. Did this man fulfill the mitzvah, the first mitzvah of the Torah, of pru or vu, the mitzvah of producing a child? And furthermore, is this child that was produced from this pregnancy 100% his child? Well, now we have a lot of thinking to do. And there's a man, he's known, I always give you these names by who the books that they wrote. He's known as the Chilkat Mechokek. The Chilkat Mechokek was Rav Moshe ben Yitzchak Yehuda Lima. And he was from Vilna. And he was around the 1600s. He didn't live too long. He died when he was about 30 years old. I'm always amazed at what these people accomplish in 30 years. I can't accomplish in 100 years what they accomplished in 30 years. But he lived from 1628 to 1658. So he wrote books. He was an author. And one of the things that he wrote was the Chilkat Mechokek. And he says, in that book, I looked it up, by the way, I don't have this book, but I would like to get a copy of it. Apparently it is available in some old sources, you can find it. And he wrote that regarding this Gemara, regarding this whole idea of Ben Zoma, who asked the question about the woman who went into the bathtub, he says, everybody knows all of the Sepharim, all the books of the Tanakh. He said, but there are other books that people don't know about, like the Chilkat Mechokek. Have you ever heard of it before? Maybe not, maybe you have. So what about the sources that we don't look at, that are outside the Tanakh, that are outside the Talmud? There's plenty of material out there. So when we know about these books outside of the Tanakh, one of them is Ben Sira. Ben Sira, through the centuries, was known as from his Greek version of a book that he wrote, and he wasn't regarded highly with Jewish text. But in one of his Hebrew texts, it was found that Ben Sira himself was a son genetically from Yirmiyahu the prophet. Ben Sira claims he was the son genetically from Yirmiyahu the prophet. Yirmiyahu left his semen and the child born was Ben Sira. What does that mean? Ben Sira left his semen. What? Like a piece of luggage? I left it on the corner of Wilmington and Overbrook and somebody picked it up and happened. It doesn't. So that's what it says. What they're saying to us was He was the biological son of Yirmiyahu without the act of intercourse. Here we go again, another one. So you see, it isn't just Jesus. Look at this. We have all kinds of people that are getting born without the act of intercourse. Must have been a thing. So they say we have a suffix here. Now we've learned together what a suffix means, and we know a suffix means doubt. It means doubt. The suffix, whenever there's a suffix, whenever there's a doubt, of course you're going to be skeptical, number one. But besides being skeptical, it also can give you leniencies. Whenever there's a doubt, in terms of you're in a hospital and somebody gets sick, or no, somebody's at home and they have indigestion, burning sensation. You don't know it's indigestion. For all you know, this person, he might be having a heart attack. God forbid. You get in your car, you're driving to the hospital, you don't fool around, and you get them checked out to make sure that they're okay. Because there's a doubt. The doubt is you don't know, is this person going to live or die? Whenever there's a doubt, it creates leniencies. Why is there a leniency? Because you can get in your car now at Shabbos. Shabbos gets put aside, you drive to the hospital and you go to the hospital and you get there. Now you get there and the doctor says, there's nothing wrong with him. He needs an Alka-Seltzer. He's got indigestion. Give him a Bromo-Seltzer. He'll be fine. He says, now you can go home. Now you got a problem because you got to walk home. Now that you found out that life is not in danger anymore, you got to walk all the way from Leslie and Shepherd from the hospital home because you can't drive home because that would be a violation of Shabbos. It wasn't violating Shabbos the first time. But now it is. So you got to either stay. If it's winter time, it's not so bad. You stay till 4:30. You drive home. But when it's Shabbos ends at 10 o'clock at night, that's a long day unless you want to walk home. Anyway, we have a lot of doubts here. Was Ben Sira the son of Yirmiyahu the prophet? Yirmiyahu, the prophet who just left his semen at the corner of Overbrook and Wilmington. On one hand, the mitzvah of Pru Urvu depended on the act of intercourse. And on the other hand, maybe the status of being father doesn't depend on intercourse, but rather providing the genetic material. So if he provided the genetic material, the semen, then the Chelkat Mechokek, he's got a doubt. There's a suffix. But the suffix, the doubt, depends around the whole question of whether paternity depends on the act of intercourse or just providing the semen. You see where we're going? It's a long road. We're not going to learn the answers today. It takes a long time to determine this because there's a lot of rabbis to look at. Every rabbi is going to have an opinion, and we have to see them all. And when we listen to them all, then you're going to make an intelligent decision. You're going to say, I want to follow this rabbi. The question of whether paternity depends on the act of intercourse or just providing semen. Esther, did you know you were sponsoring such an interesting class? Okay. Now, who is the Ibn Ha'ezer? So the Ibn Ha'ezer is a man named, he's known by his book called the Beit Shmuel. And the Beit Shmuel says in his book, we have a way of resolving the doubt. I'll take care of this, he says. There's a prohibition of the Shulchan Aruch. It's right in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the table of laws. We know that, written by Rav Yosef Karo. And he says in the Shulchan Aruch, it says that a woman should not go to sleep on the sheets and she might become pregnant. What does that mean? Well, I was in Manhattan in the Lower East Side about, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I did the walking tour of the David Donninger's house. I think Faye did it too. What is it? It's called the Tenement museum. It's fascinating. They take you into the sweatshops above and show you this is where they sewed and this is what they did and they schmuck the business. And in the apartments above, you go up the stairs and you can look on the doorways and you can see they still have the outline. It's not there, the mezuzah, but the outline of where the mezuzah once was is still there. You know, you can, but yet the way they lived was you had rooms. Do you know how they got those rooms? The Jews got those rooms? Does anybody know? It's a fascinating story. They came to America with no money. Maybe they had $2 in a sock if they were lucky. And they knew that they're going to work for Yankov at the sweatshop or for Shmuel in the pickle making shop. They've already got a job because Uncle Chaim set him up with a job with cousin Shmuel that he's going to work in his shop. Everybody helped each other. But you have 4 kids and a wife. You got to have an apartment. You're not getting a 5-bedroom home. You're getting a 1-bedroom apartment. One sleeps on the counter at night. One sleeps on the floor in the corner. One sleeps on the bed. One sleeps on the headboard of the bed. One sleeps, so, you know, they're all sleeping in a room. And they all shared bathrooms. And that's why there were diseases that were spread like typhoid and things like that. But what I found fascinating was this. They were poor. Sometimes somebody who worked an all-night shift and wasn't there all day would rent out rooms to make a few bucks extra, a few pennies extra to pay for the groceries. They'd rent out their bed to somebody else. So a person says, you know what? My bed's empty. I go to work at 6. My bed's empty from 6 until 3. You can sleep there from 6 to 3, but get out because at 4 o'clock I'm coming home to sleep. So they'd rent it out for 3 cents a day, and you rent your bed out to somebody else. So if a woman was to work in a sweatshop all night sewing and then needs just a bed to sleep in, because there's a washroom there. She can use the washroom, she can freshen up, clean till she gets her feet on the ground. And she rents the bed. Should she change the sheets before this, you know, because the man slept in the sheets before that? Well, come on. When was the last time you heard that a woman got pregnant from the sheets? I don't think it happens. They used to make a joke about it that she got pregnant from sitting on the toilet seat. Made a joke about that, but it's not really funny when you think about it that maybe back then at one time they really didn't know. It's a long story to get to the idea of where I'm going. So what happens, the Beit Shmuel says, a woman is not supposed to go and lie down on a sheets where another husband, not her husband, doesn't matter if she slept on the sheets where her husband had a nap and slept before, that's okay. That's okay, they're married. But somebody else's husband slept on the sheets. And you're innocently, you go on the sheets and you go to bed and you sleep. Maybe that man left semen on the sheets. This is what the Beit Shmuel says. And she might become pregnant. And no one will ever know who the father is. Don't forget, we didn't have DNA. If we don't know who that man is, and he has children, then that creates a possibility of incest. And in the future, that could occur if somebody else marries. Maybe he left semen on your sheets. Maybe he left semen on the other person's sheets. Maybe 2 different women got pregnant from 2 sets of sheets from the same man. Who knows? But the idea of incest comes in. Now, to some people, they wouldn't care. To Jewish people, we care. It's already bad enough. I talked about genetics and the diseases that we have and how close the relationships were. I have a grandmother that married an uncle. I know many people that married their first cousins. It's completely allowed by Jewish law. Jewish law allows it, and there's nothing wrong with it. And God willing, everybody that does that and has children, everyone should be healthy, Im Yirtzeh Hashem. But what happens down the road if this happens too often, then genetically something can happen. And then we start to look at it. We say, sometimes maybe people that come into, first of all, anybody who converts to Judaism, Baruch Tiyeh, I think is a beautiful thing, because they are far more, every day in the Shemona Esrei, we say, Al HaTzadikim ve'al HaChasidim ve'al Zikneim Chabe Yisrael. We say, Al Pleitat Sofrei Gerehem ve'al Pleitat Sofreim. We say, for all of the rabbis, for all of our righteous sages, and for all of our converts, all of our proselytes. Why? They are choosing to take a path that none of us others people have chosen. They're far more righteous than any. Look, a Jew, so I'm born a Jew, big deal. My father said, here, we sit down, you eat knishes, and you have a Seder, because that's what we do, we're Jewish. But if you're not born that way and you choose to do that, then that's far more righteous. So anybody who doesn't support a righteous act of conversion, it's shameful. And why am I saying that? Because with converts coming into Judaism, we bring other types of genetics in, which we'll find later on improves our genetics. It's good. It's actually helpful because there'll be less chance of disease. We know things today that if we knew from the 1920s and the 1900s and the late 1800s, we wouldn't do it. Today we have genetic counseling. In the Frum community, in the Shidduch world, we don't live in the Shidduch world, but there's a whole Shidduch world. The families research beforehand very often. They say, is there anything genetically wrong here? Is there a risk for Tay-Sachs? Is there a risk for this disease? Is there an element for this? We want to do everything possible to not have those things happen, because it brings pain, it brings tzorech, it brings hardship to families. We don't want that. So how do you prove later on that you are not marrying incest? If you are, today we know we can do DNA, but before DNA, a long time ago, you are someone who was produced by a woman who got pregnant by sleeping on the sheets of some other person's husband. How do you know? So he says in the Beit Shmuel, in any case, it's sufficient proof that the man who left the semen on the sheets, that he is the father halachically. That's like a Jerry Springer moment, I'm revealing it, doing the big reveal. He's saying, pru urvu, which is the first act of our commandment. It's our first mitzvah, which means be fruitful and multiply for those that don't understand the Hebrew. And kibud av va'em, the mitzvah of being fruitful, and the mitzvah of honoring your father and your mother, and even better, inheritance would apply. We're going to have to get to inheritance in a minute, because halachically speaking, there was no act of intercourse. So let's see, there's a couple of comments here. Ruth said something quite funny. She said, if only it could be that easy, right, to get pregnant on the sheets. All right, well, then we say, as Jews, do we not consider the father who raised the child and fed and clothed him or her? Is that from Noreen? I can't tell you that yet. If I tell you that, then we don't have any more classes. If I tell you that, what's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9?
I'll keep coming back.
You have to keep coming back. We're going to get there, and you're going to get there on your own. You already know the answer, but the point is that we have to see how we get to the answer. We're going to go through the sages to the modern, today poskim, the today rabbis, and see how they source it all the way back. And if you get fed up, so you won't come. Anyway, so the point is, Noreen, is that before we get to decide whether or not he is the halachic father because he raised the child, look, when I married Karen in 1993, Madeline, her daughter, it's my daughter, was 3 years old. Now, a lot of you don't know that. You just think I produced a child, Madeline, because you knew her as already 13 by the time I came to Beth David. But Madeline was not biologically my daughter. Now, Madeline, on her own, without me asking her to do it, because I would never do that, she changed her name on her own when she was 16 to Loomer. She went to the office. She changed her name to Loomer. She wanted to have my name because I raised her. I was the one who raised her. I was the one who sat with her in the hospital when she was sick. I was the one that changed her diapers when she was young. I was the one who was at her graduation. I was the one who did everything. So yes, now she's a Vandersloot and she's married to somebody else and she has a husband and children on her own and great. But for a number of years, she was a Loomer. Whether I'm the halachic father or not, we're going to get to it. But let's consider something else. If you are the halachic father, or you're not the halachic father, is that child entitled to inheritance? Because we know the Torah talks about inheritances. Remember Tzalafchad in the Torah and the whole issue with receiving their portion of land. There were no sons, there were only daughters, and they got a piece of land. They had up their piece of property. You know, you have to share, you have to be fair and square. But what are the sources in terms of halachically, do we have to leave something? I don't know who that kid is that the woman got pregnant from the sheets that I happened to sleep on Tuesday night in 1942. What do I care? It's not my business. I left the semen at Overbrook in Wilmington, and if she wants to pick it up, that's her business. And if she has a child, I don't have to inherit. I don't have to leave my Yerusha to the, you know what I mean? So you have to look at this. So, you know, there's one of our sources, the Taz. So, you know, in the Shulchan Aruch, you have the great Rabbi Rav Moshe Isserlis is the. We'll look at the Ramah later. We'll look at the Ramah. He's known as the Ramah, and he writes commentary and gives us the Ashkenazi opinion. Because don't forget, Rav Yosef Karo really represents the Sephardic authority. So we have our own authority, Rav Moshe Isserlis, and we're going to see what maybe the Ramah says. But before we, and whenever I say bottom line, it's not the bottom line. It's only the bottom line of where we're at today before the end of the class. It's not the bottom line of what's going to be, which we'll really figure out. There's going to be 10 different bottom lines. David Goldberg says, just curious, how many of the modern rabbis offering commentary on IVF are women? Great question. Not one. You know, interesting, David, it's a good point, but there was, you know, in the Orthodox world, and when I say the Orthodox world, I don't mean the modern Orthodox world. The modern Orthodox world does now make rabbis. I don't know if you know that. The modern Orthodox world gives smicha to rabbis, but it's a limited smicha. They're teachers. They can teach and they can guide women on issues of nida, separation, and things like that. But what they can't do is they're not supposed to sign a ketubah. They're not allowed to be a mashkiach even in a restaurant. They can't even be in charge of a kitchen, because in the Orthodox frum world, women are not allowed to be in positions of authority. Still, today. So that's a very good question. So the Taz and the Shach are the sidebars in the Shulchan Aruch. They give commentary in the sidebars. And before we wrap it up in 1 minute, we'll pause, but we're just beginning to crack open the surface of what's going to come ahead. It's going to be, I promise you, it'll be interesting. I hope, at least for me it is. So the Taz says that he brings forward the words that we heard from this Chilkik Mechokik. And he says, you know what? He says, the proof, it's not a good proof at all. The proof that the father is the father because he's the biological father, it's no good. I don't buy it. He says, maybe we'll consider the provider of the genetic material. Maybe we'll consider him only if the question is to be strict, then we would prohibit him from marrying the children of the father. We don't want anybody to marry the children. So this doesn't mean that we 100% embrace that idea. But he says only because we want to be strict, that's concerned. He said, we have a suffix, we have a doubt, again with a doubt. And he says, if it's a question of pru or vu, being fruitful and multiply because he produced the children, even though he didn't even know he produced a child, he didn't want to produce a child, and he left the genetic material at the corner of Wilmington and Overbrook. He didn't even want to do it. Nevertheless, he says, I'm not sure about that. He says, but we have to admit one thing. Something happened. There is something called fatherhood here. There's a child that's born. There's a child that's born. There's something here called fatherhood. We have to admit that. And he said, these other children of his, if he has other children, and they marry each other from the two sets of sheets that he happened to leave the genetic material on, then that's prohibited. They can't marry each other because that's incest. And he says, when the situation comes up, of course, if it ever happens, we're going to have to take a very, very strict view on that. We can't allow that. So I'm going to give one more idea, which is a little bit enlightening, and then we'll stop for today. We're going to get a little more modern, a little bit more modern to today's times, because I've mentioned him many, many times, and I love his work, and that's why I always mention him. The Tzitz Eliezer is fascinating. Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg. I pronounce it Waldenberg. If you look it up, it's actually Waldenberg with a W. The reason I say Waldenberg is his father and his grandfather went by Waldenberg, but later on it was changed to a W. So originally it's Waldenberg. Now what happens is with Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, who served in the Shaarei Tzedek hospital with the medical team and advising them on halacha and giving them insight as to what they can do within Jewish law to do the best thing they can for every patient, he says, and this is a modern rabbi from our generation, on the Ashkenazi side, I'll make mention of that. He says, the story of Ben Sira and being born by his mother that happened to get pregnant by going into the bathtub after some man was in the bathtub first and left his genetic material in the bathtub, he says that's highly doubtful. Well, that's shocking. He's now saying somebody's full of malarkey here. Somebody's full of malarkey here. The Tzitz Eliezer is no small-time rabbi. He's a heavyweight here. And he's saying, it's doubtful. I don't believe the story. He said, it's true that the story is quoted by great rabbis, by great poskim, and they seem to believe it. But this story, he said, should not be taken at face value. Therefore, he says, the whole idea collapses. Boom. With one swift stroke of the feather, he goes, boom, it vanishes. We're going to disregard it. And even back in the Middle Ages, he says, they weren't convinced that it really happened. And he uses these words. There's no room in halacha to rely on doubtful stories like this. And then he says, we can't decide the halachic status of a child by stories. They don't have a reliable source to them. It's a story. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not true. It's like midrash. I love midrashim. Because midrashim brings Torah alive. You know, you tell a story and it brings it alive. It makes you feel warm and fuzzy. We always have a great message. I often bring midrash into my speeches whenever I have the opportunity. And but can you really believe a midrash? It doesn't say it in the Torah. There's no volume in the Tanakh about Ben Sira. There's no reliable source. So the rabbis here are saying, show me the real stuff. Show me the Gemara, the Talmud, the Chumash. Show me a source somewhere where this happened. Certainly, I don't see it in the Old Testament. Maybe after that in the New Testament, but we don't learn the New Testament. Have you ever read it? I've read it. I find it a very fascinating story, the whole thing from start to finish. Doesn't mean you have to believe it just because you read it. It's fascinating to read. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, he formulates this rule, and he makes the rule, he develops it very concisely. And he says that the Khatam Sofer embraces the Ramban's idea. He says, now, why does he have to say that? That's how he starts. He says, the Khatam Sofer embraces my idea. Because whenever anybody feels a little bit insecure, that's how they sometimes start. It brings weight to it. If I say to you, I believe this, you might say, okay, so Marshall believes it. I'm going to look at Rabbi Google because I trust Rabbi Google more than I trust Marshall. I want to know. But if I say to you, Rabbi Shaim told me today that, it brings some weight to it. But it doesn't necessarily bring truth because you haven't heard it from Rabbi Shaim. You heard it from Marshall Loomer, who said Rabbi Shaim said. And that's already third party, right? So we have to think of that too. But the Ramban says, the Khatam Sofer agrees with me that anything that does not have a clear source in the Gemara or the Mishnah, there is no reason to believe it. Well, that we can follow. If there's no source in the Gemara or the Talmud or the Torah, then you can't necessarily accept it. Show me a source in the Gemara from the great rabbis, and then maybe if you can link that to a pasuk in the Torah, you'll have something to rely on. So all the more so says the Ramban. He says, he says that you cannot decide halacha by stories. And then the Tzitz Eliezer takes the whole story and he says, gone. I don't believe any of it. And the story vanishes. So everything that we learned today is out the window. And that's what you did. You just spent an hour with me learning a story about something that isn't even regarded. So the question is the hour worth it? The hour is worth it, because when we get to the other stories and the other parts of how they actually decided it, what you'll say is, I heard this story once about this guy named Ben Sira, who was said in his book that he was the son of Yirmiyahu the prophet, and Ben Sira's mother happened to get pregnant in the bathtub, and that's how I was born. I don't know if I'd run around and tell that story, but anyway, that's Ben Sira's story. So we learned a story, and I promise you, I think we're off for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks. Okay, I'm going to give you a break because you've had enough. But we will get through this whole concept and the idea. We'll do it as quickly as possible, and we'll bring it forward and with the modern rabbis. Surely there is room for leniency, and there's a great possibility for it, but we have to look at it and see why and how, and we'll establish it together. We'll find the real sources and what they mean. I'll let you go. I want to wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a healthy and happy Pesach. And I want to thank Esther again for sponsoring the class. Esther, thank you so much. It's a beautiful thing to do, and it helps learn. I do this. This is, the shul doesn't tell me to do it. I do it because I love to do it. This is something that I love to do, and to share this, what I learned in the time and the story. So let's get together again right after Pesach. I can hardly wait to bring you the sources and the value to the sources. So Chag Sameach, and eventually a Shabbat Shalom.
Marshall,
Wait, there it is. Jesus Became Christian. That's the book. I read it because of Dr. Shimmer. It was a fantastic, I tell you, I highly recommend it. It's a thesis. It's actually a study. Yeah. You will see how Apostle Paul was really originally named Saul. And Saul changed his name so that he could preach the ways of Jesus throughout the world and sell it to the Romans, and how the Romans bought into it, because originally it wasn't through the James only had Yerushalayim to deal with, so he wasn't so successful. Was it Constantine, David, that he sold it to? And he believed, yes, it was. Okay. You know what, David, you should give a course on that. You're the perfect person for that. Yeah, you should, 100%. David has a lot of knowledge, and he'll share some of it with us, I'm sure. So everybody, Chag Sameach, and we'll see you soon.
This is the little Haggadah that I had as a child. Oh,
Let me see.
it was this one.
I have that. I love that. I have that.
I thought it was from a coffee company, but it's
No. Is that the hard cover or the soft cover?
yeah, it's there's some really nice pictures in it, not a lot.
They made it in a hard cover, but my sister took them. I never got them. I love that old Haggadah. That's a beautiful Haggadah.
And I have the yellow and orange one that we were talking about.
Yeah, that's the Goldberg.
We've all got that one.
I have a new one.
Everyone has that.
I
And
have a
had
new one. A new one
had a
today
blue-
too. I'm going to show
I had
it.
a
to you.
blue and white one, but I don't know where it is. It must be downstairs. But thank you, Marshall.
Okay, I got today. It came the Haggadah with the commentary by the Chazon Ish by Rav Karelitz.
Very nice. Enjoy.
Yeah, look, he looks religious.
Oh,
Oh,
look at
Paula's got one. Oh, that's
Anyway.
nice.
Yeah, I have that too.
There's so many out there, you can never have an end to them. But everybody use different Haggadahs at the Seder so that you can share something. Tell everybody, take one commentary from the book and share one commentary. Don't just read the Haggadah. Take a commentary. If everybody reads one of the commentaries, it'd be more meaningful. You'll learn something.
The Casman family wrote their own.
I know. So did a few of the families. So did the Rose
Oh,
family.
okay, yeah. It's good for us to use, yeah.
Very good. All right, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marshall.
Marshall.
Excellent. Excellent. And a good
Thank you.
Pesach to everybody.
Good pace.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank
you.
Hag Sameach to everybody.
Thank you.
Dorothy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.